In 2013, several decades after a war and the collapse of contemporary civilization, a wanderer travels on a mule through the post-apocalyptic desolation that was once the state of Utah. They call him a messenger, but we'll call him Post, who has been walking through lands that once housed human beings, but are now only inhabited by wild beasts. After walking for days, he arrives at an old town and stops at a gas station. His faithful companion, Sula, prepares to drink water from the tank, but Post stops her. First, he needs to make sure the water is potable. "I don't know anything better than Arbile water." Without hesitation, Bill, as he has decided to call the mule, dips his snout in the water, ignoring the dangers. While the animal quenches its thirst, he surveys his surroundings and has brief visions of what the world was like before the disaster. Suddenly, a noise of something falling resounds behind him. Post takes his rifle, but it turns out to be just a small antelope, frightened by the human presence and anxious to get away. After that, he checks the place and finds 3 packs of cigarettes, celebrating as if he had won the lottery. Days later, they pass through a town. Bill drags him to enter, but Post refuses. People mean trouble, and they don't need anything from them. In the end, Bill beats him, and to earn some money, Post performs a theatrical representation in which Bill is his fierce enemy. There is no other choice but to hide here. The children are fascinated with Bill and feed him, but suddenly the bell rings, and the villagers warn that bandits are approaching. Knowing that these are problems, Post decides to hide. He doesn't plan to share anything with them, much less die for a bowl of soup. Soon, Holnist Patrol breaks into the village. Their leader, General Bethlehem, demands the offering, but the settlers have not managed to gather a sufficient amount of meat. As punishment, the general orders that the missing kilos of meat will be paid in soldiers. He will hold a recruitment, and everyone who can fight will go with them. Post tries to sneak away, but in the end, they see him and capture him. "Wait, wait, wait!" He tries to protest, pointing out that he is only passing through, but they hit him on the head and he loses consciousness. Sometime later, he and several other selected men are taken to a holnist camp. The general proclaims that a new life begins for them. From now on, they are soldiers of Nathan Holmes' unified army, and we see everything they have achieved. From afar, Post watches as the soldiers take Bill, his best friend and companion, not knowing what they will do to him, but expecting the worst. Post is interrogated. When they discover that he is an actor and that he knows Shakespeare's verses well, the general promises him that he will turn him into an obedient and lethal soldier. He's right. He's not a fighter, but he will be. At dawn, the group of new recruits performs their first cross-country march, becoming too exhausted to resist any other activity. Post has already accepted his destiny, but is still worried about Bill until Captain Idaho reveals the heartbreaking news. His beloved Bill is dinner. A sterile cross between a horse and a donkey, an abomination. The next morning, Bethlehem gathers all the recruits and orders them to sit to listen to the 8 laws of the clan. The surprise is that there are 21 recruits and only 20 seats. The last one left standing is punished and hung from a rope. After explaining the first 7 laws, Bethlehem reveals the 8th to them. Disobeying an order is punishable by death. And since the recruit had been ordered to sit down and did not succeed, the general leaves. Sergeant Idaho says that the last person who dared to challenge the general, Colonel Getty, was forgiven, but Bethlehem tanned his tongue, and now he is his lapdog. And since then, old Getty follows him everywhere like a dog. However, Post does not plan to be Bethlehem's dog. That night, he looks for Woody, who was recruited with him, and reveals his plan to escape to the coast. The next morning, the recruits are tasked with catching a wounded lion on the other side of the bridge. As a test, Bethlehem sends Post with only a knife. "Come back alive and we'll give you a lion chop." Post crosses the bridge with courage. On the other side of the bridge, There are two soldiers watching who point to where the beast went. Post finds the body of a soldier who was a victim of the lion and is ordered to carry the body back to the battalion. But while crossing the bridge, he realizes that the waters are deep, and if he jumps, he could escape using the current in his favor. The soldiers on the shore open fire, but the rapid current drags him to safety. Sergeant Idaho orders Woody to jump and chase Post to eliminate him at all costs. Soon, Post reaches the shore and runs into a Bethlehem lackey. Post asks him to get away, but the boy begins to shout, giving away his position, so Post does what is necessary. "I have it. I'm sorry." At that moment, Woody catches up with him and offers him an alliance. The giant hesitates but is about to accept when Idaho appears. For a few seconds, they pretend to be fighting. Post takes advantage of the distraction to sneak into the bushes. The wounded sergeant follows him and ends up in the mouth of the enraged lion. That night, having eluded the pursuit, Post wanders in the rain, barely aware of his path. The cold and exhaustion overwhelm him. To keep warm, Post puts on a dead man's clothes and lights a small bonfire. With the light of the fire, he realizes that the clothes he is wearing are from a mailman and spends the night reading the letters. Jerry wants to go to school to become a builder. At dawn, after burying the mailman's remains and taking the letters with him, he sets off. The first town he finds is Pine View, but the inhabitants refuse to allow strangers to enter. Post pretends to be a mailman and says that he was sent by the reformed government of the United States of America to re-establish communication between cities. To convince the townspeople, Post throws the letters on the ground and begins to read the names of the recipients until he pronounces the name of one of the villagers. Irene March, 478 River Road. The doors open and a blind woman asks someone to read the letter out loud. The message turns out to be from her sister, written 15 years ago. For her, it is a true miracle, and Post earns the respect of everyone who believes that he truly represents the government, and they give him food and a hot bath. However, everyone wants to know about the new world. They have so many questions that Post knows he will not be able to maintain his facade for much longer, so he decides to escape. But the sheriff stops him. He knows he is an imposter and wants him to leave. Before that, Post asks for food and drink and to be allowed to leave the letters at the office. There, he meets a boy named Forth who wants to be a mailman. He is alone and has no one, so he convinces himself that he was born to deliver letters. "With the authority at my disposal, I authorize you to transport the mail." Days later, Bethlehem arrives in Pine View, and upon seeing the United States flag flying in the post office, orders it to be burned. Later, Bethlehem sets his eyes on a beautiful woman. He wants to have relations with her, but her husband objects and pays the price for speaking without permission. Bethlehem orders the woman to be taken away and finds out about the supposed mailman, so he sends patrols to catch him. Forth, who faithfully believes in his oath, wants to go in search of Post to help him. Meanwhile, Post arrives at Fort Benning where he delivers more correspondence and is received as a hero. Suddenly, the alarms sound. Bethlehem's troops are approaching, but the population refuses to open the doors and tells them that there is a representative of the true American government inside. Furious, Bethlehem decides to besiege the city by force and kill everyone who dares to oppose him. "I will negotiate a deal. Give them more provisions." Post approaches the general with a white flag. Bethlehem does not recognize him due to his short hair and clean-shaven face. Post tells him that they will give him double the usual tribute. He just has to forgive the people, but Bethlehem wants to make an example and orders the attack. Just at that moment, Abanokea, his guard, takes his weapon and just in time shoots the mailman's escorts, saving him. Taking advantage of the occasion, Post knocks a bandit off his horse, jumps into the saddle, and rescues Abby. After escaping, they are forced to hide in the mountains for a few months. Bethlehem's patrols do not dare to cross the snow, so they are safe for now. Finally, spring arrives. One day while Post enjoys the sun, Abi points out that the mountain pass is now clear. This means they can return to civilization. Suddenly, they run into a teenager who is delivering mail. She is surprised to learn that they have never heard of the mailman, the greatest man in the new history of the United States. Post accompanies her to the town, where Ford has created an entire team of young mail carriers who spread hope to the towns. Ford runs towards him and hugs him, explaining that after leaving Pineview, he established a postal network that connects communities throughout the Pacific Northwest. In addition to delivering letters, the service spreads faith in the restoration of the government and calls for resistance against Bethlehem's tyranny. One day, Post returns to Pineview, where the sheriff admits that he misjudged him. Meanwhile, Bethlehem captures a mail carrier and tortures him to reveal the location of the camp. In the car, he says, "Mail delivery? You want war, I'll give you war." Bethlehem takes control of Pineview and threatens to kill 10 people a day until Post delivers fire. To save the rest of the young people, Post pretends to receive a letter from the president ordering him to dissolve the postal service and tells everyone to burn their uniforms. Once everyone leaves, he tells Abi that he will flee north and wants her to come with him. Meanwhile, Beltran catches Ford with the help of a traitor. Traitor. By that time, Post has reached a city built on the edge of a dam. Tom, the city's leader, reveals that they are fighters. They need a leader in battle, and they are willing to fight alongside him if he wants to defeat Battle. Soon, an army arrives at General Bethlehem's camp, marching under the American flag with both armies face to face. Bethlehem orders Ford to be brought in. At that moment, Post advances with a white flag and asks to speak with Bethlehem to avoid a bloodbath. Post challenges him to a one-on-one duel, invoking the 7th law of Bethlehem's army. "I invoke the 7th law." Bethlehem accepts the challenge, and the battle begins. Both are evenly matched, but Bethlehem acts dishonestly and looks for his saber. However, he ends up being defeated in front of all his soldiers, and Post takes control of the army, declaring a new era of peace where the soldiers will be good men and stop robbing the innocent. Nevertheless, Bethlehem refuses to accept his defeat and tries to assassinate Post from behind. Luckily, Katie intervenes and murders the man she served for years. When Post returns, he discovers that she had given birth to their daughter. Her name is Hope, and the film ends with her 30 years later, inaugurating a statue in honor of her father, the first mailman of the New World, in 2043.